6 minutes into her final championship game, U.S. soccer star Megan Rapinoe tears her Achilles, and her response to that is this. This is proof that there is no God. Well, we're going to talk about that today. Welcome to Grounded, the place to hear the salty truth. I'm your host, Scott Cates, coming to you live from the Northeast Georgia mountains and the tiny town of Tiger as we kind of creep into what's kind of looking like the Christmas season here coming up. We're not quite into December yet, but we're close. And I've been wanting to address this simple issue here, or not simple issue, really, it's more complex than that. This is a U.S. soccer star, Megan Rapinoe. She tried to laugh off this injury pretty good, but as far as the National Women's Soccer League Championship, it was her last game, and she went down within 6 minutes, just the first 6 minutes in the game, and tore her Achilles. And when she did, it's a major injury. And her response, here's what she said, and this is a quote. It says, "I'm not a religious person or anything, and if there was a God, like, this is proof that there isn't." So she's obviously suffering from the fact that she has an injury. And so it's blamed on the fact that there is no God. This is just proof that there is no God, that he would have me go down 6 minutes into my final championship game, and I'm taken out of the game. I can tell you something about physical injury that I do know personally by myself. I wanted a chance to just talk about this today because I myself have suffered some physical injury as well. I was at a point in my life where I was working with students that were middle school, high school age, active. I ended up being I was a weightlifting coach for a bit, working with students in that age. Ran the bleachers on a regular basis during those days and had an enjoyable time working with kids mid-30s. I was in my mid-30s at this point. I was enjoying life, enjoying that, and I really thought that I would have this permanent relationship with working with students. I really did. I thought it would that would be the rest of my life. I thought I was probably going to be eternally in that place, that's where I would be. I would always have a voice to speak. I really enjoyed it. I really loved it. I really loved being with students. I still do today. I love the questions that they have, and I've made it through. In student ministry, I made it through just prior to the millennial generation, and then entering into the millennial generation, then coming through the millennial generation, then coming to the iGen generation, and the generations that are coming onto the scene now. I've been through all of these and worked through working with the issues of each one of those generations. I've enjoyed all of it. But right in the heart of working with students during that time, I had a serious injury. I was actually at a place in North Florida, and I was up doing a family conference. Is what I was speaking at, a family conference. And while I was speaking at this family conference, it was a conference where we were basically staying on this campus. And it was late at night, and a bunch of students wanted to play wiffle ball, of all things. And I enjoyed playing wiffle ball. I had perfected a pitch in wiffle ball that I could make that ball curve and almost no one could hit it. And I actually had a moment in student ministry a number of years prior to that where one of the students who was a baseball champion, he looked at me and he said, "I tell you what, we're going to go out here into this place, and I'm going to put a tire behind me, and if you can throw that ball into that tire and you get it past me," he said, then I will definitely look at you and say I'm not worthy. I said, "Okay, let's do this." So we got in there, and I struck him out, literally struck him out. He could not believe, because the wiffle ball is designed at a certain category. I know none of you really want to know all the statistics on this or the theory on this, but a wiffle ball is designed well, that you can curve one of those amazing if you can get that pitch right. And I had worked on it and worked on it. So I decided this particular night, this is a couple years after that, but I decided this particular night that I was going to play. And it was going to be a girls against guys game. It was late at night. It was about midnight. And we had decided to go out onto a ball field outside, or actually to a basketball court outside, which was asphalt. And we were going to play some wiffle ball. And the teams were even. There were just enough guys and just enough girls to be able to play the teams and play the field positions as well. But they needed someone to pitch. And so I agreed to pitch, and I agreed that I would not do anything but just pitch to the girls and the guys, which allowed me kind of, and this is one of the things that I did, is I knew there were all of these guys that were all part of the baseball team. Some of the girls that were playing softball, but some of the girls had never played really. And so I would pitch easy to the girls that had never played so they could hit the ball and feel it really great. And then for the ones that were sort of pro, I could throw those curveballs and strike them out and watch them throw a fit on those nights. It was fun. We had a great time. We were having a great time that evening. And we were mouthing off, talking smack. Now that's something that I have done through the years, just used humor, just love humor. Love to talk smack back and forth. And so when you're out on the ball field, talking smack back and forth is fun. And girls can talk some smack. I'm just going to tell you that right now. The girls can seriously talk smack, and they can do a really good job at that. Guys do that, but they're kind of too cool for school in those ages. But, man, girls can talk some smack. They really get. Middle school girls can talk smack like nobody else can. I'm just saying. So we got to talking some smack, and I would throw the ball and pitch the ball. And finally, one of these girls who was a softball pro, basically, she says to me, "I'll bet you I can strike you out." I said, "Sweetheart, I bet you I hit a home run." And we just got talking back and forth. And finally, she said, "I tell you what, you put your money where your mouth is." And I said, "That's fine." And I agreed to do something I said I wasn't going to do. And there was a gut feeling really that I had in that moment that said, you don't need to be doing this. But I did it anyway. And so I stepped up to the plate, and she pitched that ball. And sure enough, man, I made some contact and hit it actually into a pickup truck out in the parking lot. And I started to just sort of walk my way around the bases. Well, they went and fished that ball out of that truck. And by the time I got around to third base, they were coming after me. And in wiffle ball, you can throw that ball and throw somebody out and hit them, and that's how you throw someone out. So I was running from third base as hard as I could run. And she went to throw that ball. And when she threw that ball at me, I took flight in the air. And for some reason in that moment, it never happened to me before in my life, has not happened to me since, my right knee locked up. And I landed on the base, which there was a little sand on the ball court, and the base slid. And as the base slid, it went forward and grabbed a hold of the grass real quick. And I went forward, my knee went backward, went off like a 12-gauge shotgun. It startled everyone. It was a loud, loud noise, and it broke my knee in half. And I hit the ground. I never took that next second step. I reached down and I grabbed a hold of my knee, spun around in a quick circle, and fell on my back and said, I just broke my leg. I'd never broken a bone in my whole entire life until then. And at first I thought, well, wait a minute, it can't be that bad. Had a paramedic come over and he said, I tell you what, let's see if you can walk on it. Well, I broke it good, y'all. I mean, I broke it some kind of good. So I got up to go, and I got a couple of guys on each side, and we were going to see if I could walk. And when we did, it felt like two bricks rubbing together in there, just that scraping inside, and I blacked out. And I went down. I could hear everything going on. I blacked out. I was laying on my back. And I thought, what now? What now? Well, I broke it real good, by the way. And if you think, if anybody had a reason to say, is there really a God? I probably had a good reason in that moment. But I ended up going to the ER that night. And when I went to the ER that night, I was in the bed that was next to the desk that was there. I went in, they had taken x-rays, and they were calling the orthopedic trauma surgeon that evening to come in from on-call. And he said, I heard him, he was on speakerphone, and he said, I'm out to dinner with my wife. And she said, this is a pretty serious case. He said, look, just splint him up and tell him to make an appointment with me next week. She said, I don't think it's going to be for that. He said, I'm not coming in, splint him up and send him home. Well, the first thing that happened was when I went in, my father was also great. He's also great at talking smack too. So I kind of grew up right honestly. And so then when they were moving me from the gurney basically to the bed in the ER, he walked in and he was joking about, we'd joke with each other about all kind of stuff. But he looked up and he said, yeah, come on now. I want to see him move a 400-pound man from this. And he was joking about that. And I didn't weigh anywhere near 400 pounds, but he was just joking with me. And we moved to the bed. Well, the nurse just wrote down, she was writing all this stuff down. She wrote down that I weighed 400 pounds. I don't even think she ever looked. So when they came to actually give me pain meds, they gave me pain meds for a 400-pound man, which really did one. You know, when you give pain meds to a man that weighs right about 200 pounds and you give it double the dosage in like that, it's amazing what it does. You can't see anything. You can hear everything. It drops all your blood pressure out, so there's not enough blood pressure to actually go to your eyes to see. You black out. And she came in and she said, what's going on? I said, I can't see anything. I was blind. And she said, what's going on or whatever? And then she looked at me. She said, how much do you weigh? I said, I weigh about 205. She said, what? I thought you weighed near 400. I said, no, ma'am. She gave me the dose for a 400-pound man. So now they have to come in, and I don't know what they gave me to offset that, but whatever they gave me to offset that made me nauseated. So I would go to close my eyes, and she would say, Mr. Cates, I need you to open your eyes. I said, sweetheart, listen to me. When I open my eyes or close my eyes, I see the same thing, darkness. She says, I just need you to keep them open. So we had a night in the ER, to say the least. And if any man could say there is no God, that would have been the night. And then she finally came in when she was checking me out, and she leaned down in my ear and she said, you came at a bad time. I said, it's the ER. I didn't know you could come at a bad time in the ER. But we packed me up, and I was reeling from all the pain meds that they had given me, and they took me home to go and start. I guess I would come back the following week for this appointment, which is what I was settled in to do. And the next morning, my brother came, and he said, you don't need to sit on this anymore, because my leg was about 3 times the size now, swollen like crazy. He said, let me take you to a different place. So we got in the car, and we took me to a different place, where I went in the door to another ER, and they put me on another bed in the ER. And the orthopedic trauma surgeon came in, and he began to sort of prick at my toes with a pen. Had a big pen or whatever, and was pricking at my toes. He said, you feel this? You feel this? No. He said, Mr. Cates, all the circulation, you've got compartment syndrome, and all of the circulation is cut off to your foot. And he said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to fix this or not. We have to go into emergency surgery now. But he said, there's a good chance that we're going to have to amputate from the knee down at this point. So I'm not sure how you'll come out. I said, man, save it if you possibly can, please. So I went into surgery, expecting to come out with it missing. But it was an amazing thing that I'd gone into surgery, and when I came out, his nurse, and when I was actually alert to be able to listen to her, said, he took more time with you than I've ever seen him take with anyone. She said there was a point they just opened up the knee, and if you see the scar, it comes from the top of my knee, actually, and goes all the way down almost to the top of my ankle on that leg. That's how bad the break was. And she said he laid it all the way open, and he sat there with it wide open, and he had literally sat there with his arms, his fists kind of balled up, and his face resting on his fists balled up, looking at that, trying to figure out how to put it all back together. And she said he set out to put it back together. And that's exactly what he did. He was detail-oriented. Your circulation is back. And she said he thinks he might have done the best job he's ever done with anyone. And he's very proud of it. I said, okay. But to recover from that and to recover, because I'd had compartment syndrome, what happened is that the skin would not go back. And I realize this is very graphic, but he said the skin would. And so about an inch, it was about an inch wide open. And they would come in every single day. And where it had where it come in every day, where it had covered over, had grown, starting to grow in, they would cover and they would remove all that had grown in, which is extremely painful. And they did that every day for 8 days. On top of all of that, I am not making this up when I tell you, the air conditioning system went out in Florida, and it was hot in that room. So I'm in a room, no air conditioning at this point, none whatsoever, low on potassium that they're now having to give me through the hand. And by the way, potassium going into a vein, when they can't do it up on your arm, going into a vein feels like diesel fuel. It's like torture. It is the most painful thing, one of the most painful things I've ever gone through in my life. And they had to give this to me a couple of times a day. And it was so brutal. I mean, I was coming out of my skin. It hurt so bad. 8 days in the hospital, them coming in every so often, making sure. And then they would take where they had stitched this all up on my leg, and they would tighten it more and more. It's a swelling begin to go down more and more every day. So, folks, if you don't think that wasn't torture, it was torture. I was crying out to God, and I was saying, Lord, what is the purpose for this? And I kept saying, I've served you all this time. I mean, I've served you. I really have. I've done all of this. But there was never a point where I said, there is no God. Never. Psalm 14 says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They've done abominable works. There is none who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there are any who understand or if there are any who seek God. They've all turned aside. They've altogether become corrupt. There's none who does good. None, not one. I really thank God that prior to this injury, I knew him. I mean, it really did. Because I had the comfort of him during this injury to be able to come and say, I don't understand. I don't. I was asking why. Now, some people might talk to you and tell you, oh, it's sinful for you to ask God why. You just need to. It's not sinful for you to ask God why. In my heart of hearts, I really wanted to know, what's the purpose for this? I don't understand. Every day, this man would come in. Finally, after about 5 days of this, his nurse said, he must really like you. And I said, why? She said, because he is the one that does all the cleaning of your wound. And he's the one that bandages you back together. I said, and so? She said, he's never done that. I've never seen him do that with another patient. Well, after 8 days of him caring for me in the hospital, I had to go and see him every day for 30 days to make sure for the wound care and all of that. Well, he was actually from South Africa. And he was in a place where he was searching what to do with his life. And he had come, he was a trauma surgeon, and he had come and he was trying to figure out, where do I go from here? What do I do from here? What is the meaning of life was really his question. And so we would have these deep discussions and these deep questions in his office. I would come in a wheelchair, and he would wheel me back to the desk and still wait on patients while he was talking to me. And he would keep me. And finally, one day, I said, look, I do understand the meaning of life. I actually brought him a video about Jesus Christ, and I said, I don't know if you grew up with this, but I want you to watch this film, and I want to talk to you about it tomorrow. He said, fine. He watched the film. He came back, and I said, my question is this. I want you to understand that Jesus went to the cross to die for your sins. And if you're looking for meaning in life, and you're really looking for how to go forward, why don't you go forward with Jesus and pray that he would forgive you of your sins? So at his desk, this doctor accepts Jesus Christ. And so he comes to know Christ. And I've still got about 2 weeks to go. The next 2 weeks, we're in discussion. I keep talking to him. We're in the Word. I gave him a Bible. We're having Bible study at his desk every time I come in. And finally, I'm coming in. There's nobody else coming, and just me. I mean, there's nobody else in the waiting room for anyone. The last week, there was no one else waiting. And he'd asked me a question earlier on. He'd said, my contract is about up here. And he said, I don't know whether to extend it because I make such good money, but I miss my family. And he said, they need Jesus too. And I said, well, maybe you've got your answer. Maybe you just need to take Jesus home with you and just go And whenever your contract is up, he didn't tell me when it was going to be up. The last day I went to see him, I prayed for him. I thanked him for his care. I was going to be able to go back home where I was actually from. and I left him. This was on a Friday. I got back to South Georgia, where I was from at the time, and I got back into my house and situated. On Monday, my insurance company calls. They want the name of the doctor. So I give them the name of the doctor and his number. Then they call me back a few minutes later, and they say, well, he's nowhere to be found. And they also told us, don't worry about it. I said, what? And so I called his nurse, and I said, hey, listen, I'm just calling, searching for him. And she said, he's gone. He went home to South Africa. You were his last patient, and he wanted to make sure he took good care of you before you left. And she said, and he's also going to continue to take good care of you. And I said, what do you mean? She said, there is no charge. All that he did in that in that operating room, all of that care for all that time, he never charged me a dime. It began to come clear to me the reason why. I had to go down in that moment. That's not the only reason. There was a great decision I needed to make coming up. And I went to seek the Lord on a great decision. And so after that, I'm like, Lord, how can I continue on with doing what I'm doing? I fasted for 40 days. Literally fasted for 40 days. And asked for God's direction. And he moved in my life during that time. And moved me to doing what I do today. And moved me to the place where I am today, all of these years later, that I would not have heard, would not have answered the call to, had he not stopped me in that moment. See, God used that, and he used that circumstance to protect me from myself. And he put me down so that I would listen and seek and find him. Well, if you think that's the only thing, a few years later, it ends up being probably 10, 12 years later, I'm about to leave my house one night, and I'm not listening to reason. I'm very angry. I'm angry at an individual, and I'm not listening to reason. I'm not going to listen to reason. I'm fixing to go just absolutely lay into someone, and I probably would have tarnished my whole soul and my whole reputation, everything that I am, in the fury of that moment. Because after all, I will say this, I'm passionate. I really am. I really am passionate about the Word of God, and passionate about truth, and passionate about the things that are right. I'm passionate about those things. I love passionately. That is who I am. But I also can fight with some passion too. And I have to be careful about that. I can respond passionately. I have to be careful in that passion in the other direction as well. You can call that sin if you want to. And that is definitely what it would have been in the moment. I would have gone to go just lay into someone, and in my fury and my passion of that moment, say a number of things that would have really hurt me. And so I was headed out my door, ready to go for this to happen. I was so furious. And this never happened to me before. My heel, as I was going down the steps of my house, hooked on one of the steps. And I couldn't move it. I was so furious that I demanded that I move it, and I jerked that thing real quick, and I fell down those steps, and I broke my other knee. The crazy part about that whole thing was, while I was laying on the sidewalk, because I went all the way down the steps and landed on the sidewalk, and I was laying there, the leg that was broken, my heel was hooked up on one of the steps. So it was the most painful position, with my knee bent backward and broken, that you could ever imagine. It was pain that was excruciating, which means a cry from the cross, by the way. But if it's excruciating, just laying there, as God was literally saying to me, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? And I was saying, yes, Lord. Because by that time I had already been overseas, and I'd been to Africa, and I had been with the people that were shepherds, They were shepherding animals. And I had been with a shepherd who was carrying a small goat around his neck with a broken leg. And I said, oh, how did the goat break his leg? He said, I broke his leg. I said, you did what? He said, I broke his leg. And I said, why did you do that? He said, because he was prone to wander. And it was too dangerous for him to get too far away. So I broke his leg and keep him with me. And while his leg heals, he's right around my neck this whole time. I carry him everywhere he goes. And he said, when I put him down, he'll never wander far from me again. And as I was laying on the sidewalk in that moment, I realized, God, you did it again. You protected me from me. What am I thinking? And I stopped right there in my pain, actually, and blacking out. I'm laying there and I'm thinking to myself, I did this. I did this. I did this to me. And I'm the one that tempted or pushed God to protect me from myself. I really am, because in that moment, that took place to protect me from me. And I knew it. And I went through that one with some humility. I didn't even have to ask why. I knew why. And as I went through the healing of all of that, and I was healing and in the wheelchair and confined to the wheelchair again, except for the other knee now. Yes, I have a nice pair of scars that are comparable. But I look down at those scars and I think to myself, man, that is every time that pain would just radiate from one of those knees, it reminded me of the work of God, and it kept me humble. So one Sunday night, the pain was still in the knee I had just broken, and it was still hurting me and I was limping around. And I remember I had a lady that came to me and she said, hey, I want to pray for you. Let me pray that God would take away the pain. I said, no. I stopped for a second. And she said, what are you doing? I said, do not do that. And she said, why? I said, because that pain reminds me of who's in authority. And every time I feel it, it keeps me from jumping back into my passion and being a man of God that I need to be, and not a man of passion in my own strength that I was. And so please, I'm begging you. I know you're going to think this is crazy, but the pain that I feel from time to time reminds me of the work of God, and I need it. So please don't. And she didn't, and she was shocked that I'd ask her not to do that. Eventually, the pain went away. Today, I run 3 times a week. I run 5 to 7 miles on those days. I run early in the morning. That is the restoration of God. I'm telling you, it's amazing, actually, with 2 knees that have been broken, to be able to run. But I will tell you today that on breaking both knees, both injuries were the work of God in my life and in the lives of others. He did a work in those moments. Finally. When I broke the other knee, I never got to finish out that family conference. But while I was in the wheelchair and recovering, they had asked me to come back and actually close out the session that I was in. So I wheeled up in a wheelchair to speak to folks in a small little church on that particular night. And I stepped up to talk about the work that God was doing in my life to a packed house. It was packed. You couldn't fit another soul in there. And on that particular night, the most amazing thing took place. People came in droves to give their lives to Jesus. They had a baptism service. At the end of that service, people were in their clothes that had given their lives to Jesus as a result of that night. That would have never happened at that family conference. But it did happen because I was sitting in a wheelchair talking about the work of God. There was a realization that God was real. Folks, sometimes in the difficulties that we face in our life, sometimes in the troubles that we go through, sometimes when people can't believe that we're still actually proclaiming that God is amazing in those moments, it's the revelation of God to those people that he's real because of how real he's been to you. Let me say this to you today. I started off this podcast talking to you about Megan Rapinoe. But let me say this. You need to pray for her. She doesn't understand. She doesn't know. She has no clue. And to me, that's sad. I can look at Psalm 14 and say, a fool says in his heart that there is no God. And there are many that don't. Men are going to be without excuse to believe in God, according to Romans chapter 1, because of the things that have been made. They're the evidence of God. My prayer is that she not die without Christ. So I just encourage you to pray for her today. But I also want you to be encouraged today to understand that even in our hardship and even in our troubles, no matter what comes, in our trials and our tribulations, in all of that, God's hand is at work. And he is working for our good, even in the moments that we cannot understand. And it's not a sin for you to stop and ask God why. It is not a sin for you to question the work of God in the moment. There's no reason for you not to do that as you let God go to work in your life. There are going to be some times and some things that happen that you just simply do not understand. And you may see the hand of God at work in that moment, and you may never see it. But make no mistake. Listen to me when I say this. If you hear anything in this podcast today, God never wastes the suffering of a believer. It always turns out for his glory. You've been listening to Grounded, the place to hear the salty truth. I'm your host, Scott Cates. My privilege to just chat with you today. If you do not know Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord, Romans 10:9 says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. Today, would you just stop and say, Lord, my sins are in the way of being able to walk with you. Please forgive me of those. Help me to walk with you in truth. Guide me. Give me abundant and eternal life in you today as I accept you as Savior and Lord. You can stop and ask Jesus to do that right now. And if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, you may have gone through some difficult times in your life. You may have gone through some major suffering. You may still be going through some of that. Hang on. Weeping may endure for the night, but our joy comes in the morning, no doubt. God does have a plan, and the trial that you face is working for your good. I promise that it is. Thank you for listening. Been a good Monday. Hope to see you next week.